Good morning, friends. Welcome to another Word of God. This is more or less a spirit contact. I might ramble a bit around and about and go somewhere else afterwards, but a good part of this is a spirit contact. And when I felt myself in contact, in close proximity to the spirit in question, I felt a sort of a combination of priest, lawyer, and confidant, psychotherapist. And, also media person, interviewer. The interviewee knew this would go out on the internet, was quite aware of that, and enjoys publicity, has all his life, and just wanted to be fairly represented, understood, sympathized with, and not seen as a villain so far beyond redemption. Such efforts would be worthless. And I suggested to him that the first thing he can do is forgive himself. And then further forgiveness will occur from others. You have to initiate the spirit of forgiveness. You have to bring it into the picture. You can hope and pray that someone else might bring it in from the outside, and it can be sourced from outside, but it's many times easier to feel it if you've moved beyond denial of your activities, denial of the suffering caused by your activities, and move into acceptance and then forgiveness. Bring those energies in. Any of the inhabitants of spirit who you would like to bring forgiveness and then redemption will do so, but only if you ask for it. This applies to any spirit anywhere, really, as far as my experience goes. And those of you who've been following this series know that it's a fairly extensive experience at this point. And I found him in a room of someone else's house. Someone else in spirit who had, maybe you could say, taken pity on him. There's many ways to misbehave on our planet, and all of them can be justified by the notion that they create a path for others to follow and gain experience. All the dark side, all of the dark side, is a mere counterweight to the light side. Everything is in balance, always was, always will be. No matter how dark the dark side looks, how much you traverse the valley of the shadow of death, telling yourself that you fear no evil, it will not disappear because you like it to disappear. If it's no use to you, it'll be use to others. You graduate from these sort of things, but you don't eliminate them. Do-gooders will always try to eliminate them, make the world a better place so that the darkness is pushed back into disappearance. It doesn't work that way. We live in a plane of duality, of light and dark, hot and cold, wet, dry, good, evil. They're all relative terms. And the greatest philosophers will always show you how to move beyond those dualities into a unity. Philosophers and prophets. And that's morally and ethically and where I live. And on my stage of the journey. And I encourage you to do so too. And if you've been following this series, you probably already do. Maybe I'm just preaching to the choir here. But let us all sing that song together. That song of beyond good and evil. That song where all experience is valid. Now, when I say valid, I do not mean beyond the reach of the law or beyond the reach of the concepts of crime and punishment. Society deems such things to be useful and morally necessary as a corrective to antisocial behavior, as a corrective to criminal behavior. And no amount of philosophy from me will challenge that. If you break society's laws and get caught, you will be punished. And that is the way of the world. And as far as I'm concerned, it's appropriate. Again, it's another example of action and reaction. An action has certain reactions, and you can't avoid them. You can try to cover them up and push them off and hide them, but they're there. They will always, what did John Lennon say? Instant karma is going to get you. And he certainly knew about that. What you shall sow, you shall reap. We all know that. Whether you're a religionist or a humanist or a spiritualist, we know that we reap what we sow at some point or other. But those who toil in the fields of darkness and shadowy motivations and immoral activity have many ways of justifying what they do. But in my experience of life, almost everybody, no matter where they're toiling, have ways of justifying what they do. Justification makes people feel good. It doesn't change what has happened, but it makes you feel good about it. And that is a huge psychological motivator for human activity. I see it all around. And I point it out, not to make people feel guilty about it, but just to point it out as a psychological mechanism. In talking to the spirit, interacting, I felt various themes pop up. Is nothing sacred? Whether that be other people's sovereignty or his privacy or his right to be taken as innocent until proved guilty. it seemed to come up over and over again. And his sad but somehow confident eyes betrayed an undertone of I was going to say pity and self-pity. A human who has backed themselves into a corner and is desperate for any way out. And perhaps not quite fully realizing as yet that making a clean breast of it and forgiving yourself is the first step. He seemed to be still on the level of justification. One of them being everyone got well paid for what they did. Everyone was well paid. Everyone was rewarded. Whether through, and that's groups and individuals, whether through philanthropy or what would be called regular cash payments. And he seemed to think that some of them are just not much more than bitchy because they feel they didn't get rewarded enough and they want more. And I tried to tie that in with his behavior pattern, which is always wanting more. And to the point of obsession, absolute obsession. And I only know this from the media reports that have come out in the last couple of weeks. This man was absolutely obsessed with a number of issues. Wealth, status, acceptance into the highest levels of society. The thrill of being around vast amounts of money. Not always just to own it, but just to be around it. He guided other very wealthy people into what he considered smart ways to move their money around and preserve it, rather than be gypped by someone of lesser status. He saw himself as something of a savior of the wealthy elite who might be a little not quite up to speed on how to move their money around to preserve it. And the more he talked, the more I seemed to sense that he felt he was doing the same thing for almost everyone. And exacting his half of the bargain, for sure. And but not sensing in any deep way that what he was doing was, to put it in the simplest terms, wrong. Children have to grow up at some point. And if he found young people who were dabbling in being grown up and being exposed to the world of corrupt human activity beyond the innocence and fairy tales of childhood, then he would lead them farther in. I could see this. I could see this very definitely. He didn't lead them to their inevitable deaths as fanatical terrorist groups do when they grab young people and they spoil them with utopian visions of what can be achieved with discipline and sacrifice. We've talked about that in earlier editions of this show. are those who dangle prizes in front of young and innocent people, knowing that their innocence and idealism can be manipulated to their ends, whether it be in the fields of politics, religion, business. There are many who do such things, selling their wares and activities as worthwhile and necessary experiences of growth. Join the army, join the religion, join the bank, join our gang. They're all looking for recruits. And the best way to get recruits is naive young people who will fall for your little preamble, your little persuasive argument. This is an honorable activity. This is a necessary activity. This will get you ahead in society. This will get you status and respect. And that respect may come from being a reservist, may come from having more money than your friends, because you basically got a better job. And young men dealing drugs, young women dealing the services of their sexuality. It's all sold to them in a fairly similar way. And they are tempted. And I see Jeffrey as a tempter. Not quite on the Satan level, if we want to use that comparison, but a tempter. There's certain individuals who are very good at tempting others into the paths of, shall we say, immorality, which may include criminality. And tempters are useful and necessary. As I've said before, all paths trail you through experience to the ultimate benefit of that experience. Benefit in education. All paths educate you as to what lies on that path and what can either, either contribute or destroy your character. Let's say build your character. And the path can build your character either through adding to it or detracting from it. Because in the end, you see through the illusions that you subscribe to, no matter what the path is. You graduate from all paths seeing the illusions, seeing that what you desired was temporary and not permanent, seeing what you desired was a false god, a temporary goal, a glamorous illusion, shadow. But you also then recognize at some point you can help others who are caught up in those illusions. And former alcoholics often make the best counselors, as we know. And they not only do that on the physical plane, they do that on the astral plane. Much channeled spirit literature covers that. The old stuff, the new stuff. So the role of the tempter, I'm sure it's been studied many times, carefully, and I'm only doing a quick recap here. Tempters are very important, no matter what they tempt you into, because you learn from being tempted. You get burned, your hand gets burned, your nose gets bashed, your self-assurance gets challenged, your confidence gets beaten up. You are one of the abused, although it may take you a long while to realize it, because the glamour of the trinkets that are handed to you trick you into feeling special, into feeling gifted, into feeling elevated status. Often the sort of ultimate argument against being tempted is that it's generally illegal and that you will fall afoul of the law, not to mention the disapproval and shame of your family and close friends. Although those involved in certain activities often have close friends also in those activities who share and support each other. And coming from a viewpoint that, well, society's hypocritical, everyone does it in some small way, so why don't we do it in a slightly more bold way? Jeffrey was nothing if not bold. He knew how to wrap people around his finger, his willpower, his charm. He was wildly intelligent on a number of levels, particularly on financial matters. And others have claimed he was, intelligent on other matters. Very intelligent. Yeah. But as we know, intelligence does not lead to wisdom, necessarily. Intelligence leads to the exercise of it. If it's exercised without love and compassion and humility, will lead to, egomania and status obsession and, pride beyond the concept of excessive, that's for sure. All the things that religion warns us against, it leads to all of them. But at the same time, you're going to go from a level of naivety to a level of knowing. And there are several ways to get to that level of knowing. And one of them is to indulge in the temptation. You know what's wrong, but you do it because you want to find out what's on the other side of doing wrong. Because those who advise you to live within the rules and the laws seem very timid to you. And you wish to break out of that timidity and fear and be bold. And so you are bold, and you do touch the hot stove that your mother told you not to touch, and you burn your fingers. Forgive me for using such a simple metaphor, but or an analogy if you prefer, because it is that simple in essence. So, Jeffrey's on his journey, Jeffrey Epstein. He's been taken in by someone on what I would guess is a lower astral plane, not a hell realm, and has been given living space, and there are many on the lower astral who still believe, no matter of their years there, that they can still find a way to work the strategies and tricks they used on Earth to benefit themselves. And that either cannot or refuse to see that the way of the astral plane is significantly different than here. And that forgiveness and compassion and mercy and love are the prime movers of creative activity on the astral plane, not deceit and manipulation and base motivations. And Jeffrey's been taken in by people that still believe that, spirits who still believe that. And he's not been there that long, so he still believes it himself. And in that, I would compare him, as I've done in other videos, to the recently dead political activist or / terrorist, who they are so strongly motivated that they try to continue their activities, mainly by telepathic influence of those of their group that are still alive. They try to help them because they see the goal, the establishing of the caliphate, or the preservation of communism or capitalism, or the continuation of a mainstream religion. They see it as a worthwhile goal. So definitely an analogy there. It takes these spirits sometimes quite a long time. Some of them recover quickly by our standards and others don't. And some go from one cause to another. I'm sure you see that on the physical plane. People go from exteriorizing their ambitions to a cause, a seemingly worthy cause. And then when that fails them, they switch to another. And there's always exteriorizing and not realizing that self-fulfillment through, how shall I say, compassionate creative activity is the way to go. And in pointing that out, I would have to say that tempters like Jeffrey see themselves operating compassionately. They see themselves doing things for others, even though they are manipulating them. I recall reading, not recently, some years ago, book reports on counseling pedophiles in jail. And the biggest hurdle is convincing them that they're not helping these children because they think they are. They're substitute parents, they're substitute siblings. They're helping the lonely, the confused, the sad. And they're very convinced of this. And see their sexual activity as part of supportive friendship, and cannot be convinced that it's not right, and it's not productive, and it's not useful for the children. And that I read that years ago. Not that I've done that kind of work myself, but a good part of what we do on this planet is operating by the rules, learning that it's actually easier and more efficient if you operate by the rules than you operate outside of them. But some bold souls choose to operate outside the rules the whole time. And by that. That's a path where they strengthen their individualism. They weaken their dependence upon the group, upon the tribe, and hew a path that strengthens their individualism. And that definitely is a valid goal. You pay the price, but then all paths have a price to pay. The path of timid conformity has a price to pay. The path of bold outlaw activity has a price to pay. And of course, I'm speaking as a modelist here, not as a lawgiver or a advisor on morality. Some cynics would say morality has been devised by those inside the castle of status, and it's devised entirely to keep those outside. And I see that reflected in the modern world when people talk about the 1% and the elite, devising the globalist structures so that they can stay on top. And there's definitely a strong whiff of truth to that argument. Not the complete truth, but one sees the patterns of behavior and the arguments behind them repeating themselves throughout the evolution of consciousness on the planet, that's for sure. Jeffrey certainly has resentments of those who he feels are going to try and get their hands on his money, on his possessions, through legal but inappropriate means as far as he's concerned. He'd rather be the giver rather than the one from which things are taken. Whether he gives small amounts to young women or large amounts to institutions, as we know he's done many times. He sees it all as bands of light on a spectrum of activity. And he doesn't seem to, like many people, souls with their obsessions, they find ways of justifying it. And the dominators always convince themselves that the abused like to be dominated, ultimately like to be dominated. They like to be told what to do. They like to follow orders and to be led. And if you bribe them sufficiently, they will do what they're told. And if they don't, you just let them go. And that's fairly obviously what he did, despite the denials. And his life path will continue. This is not over. As I've said in many other videos, going to the astral plane as a spirit is only the beginning of the second half of your incarnation. You will be you when you die, and I will be Gordon, and he will be Jeffrey, and we will continue on until we've fulfilled all our potential as that character, as that individual character. And when you've fulfilled your potential, you will lose that character. You will become a sort of pure spirit with all your lessons learned. And, to get more esoteric, rejoin your higher self, your monad, and part of your energy will come back as another soul another time, as will he. But in that astral plane existence, that post-mortem existence, which he is just now beginning, he will still be who he is. And he may become a quote-unquote reformed character, someone with a new lease on life. He probably will at some point, but who's to say how long that will be? One has to relinquish one's attachments to the glamours and prizes of your former path and set out on a new path where status and money and acquisitions are not the goal. And we know from many decades, if not centuries, of spirit literature that the absurdly wealthy often have a great difficulty giving up that attachment. And they need to be helped. Although they can't be helped until they ask for help. And I tried to help Jeffrey when I was talking to him. I spoke to him in an intelligent, perceptive manner, pointing out that I agree. I said, you're a tempter, but I recognize that the path of the tempter is a valid one, and people learn from it. And he smiled when I said that. He understood. He's intelligent enough. And around him in his life, he saw all kinds of other people doing the same thing as he worked his way up through the worlds of education and real estate and financial stuff, Wall Street stuff. He saw lots of people taking shortcuts. And it's the usual sort of situation. The gangsters see the police as corrupt and they say, well, why don't we do it? They get away with it. Why don't we get away with it? Same with the Wall Street types. They see other people getting away with it. They think, well, I can get away with it too. They see society as essentially corrupt and that they're just joining in the game in a more honest way. And same with the political radicals, the terrorists. They see society as terminally corrupt and they have to reform it. They're not joining in. Well, they are joining in, but they think they're reforming it. And we've seen plenty of that in the last few decades. And I get the feeling some of you may be saying, well, Gordon, what's the solution to all this? And I don't think in terms of solutions, really. I see our evolutionists as spirits in the material world as a process, a system that we pass through. And we pass through these systems regardless of our activity within these systems. Let me use the old metaphors, the sun shines on everyone, not just the good guys. The cop and the criminal both get to grow old and die and go to a spirit, regardless of their activities. The religious and the non-religious get to go to paradise. The afterlife is for everyone, and all you have to do to get there is die, as I pointed out some years ago. And that is a revolutionary statement, let me tell you. In the history of religion, that is revolutionary. It doesn't sound so revolutionary in our modern secular world, but believe me, for most of the time on this planet and for many millions of people in the not-so-free parts of the planet right now, it's a revolutionary statement. And the wicked will be reformed, usually because they want to do it themselves. It takes a while. Jeffrey has views on how he passed. I think you can imagine what they are. Your suspicions are correct. He embodied dark forces all his life, and his transition was facilitated by other dark forces. A lot of people think he deserved all he got, and I would tend to agree. But then I would add to that everyone deserves what they get. We create our own reality and we create our own karma. I think we all know that. I'm sure those of you who regularly listen would agree with that. I'm not saying anything new, but it's a little reminder. And there is no escaping the results of your actions. And Jeffrey sort of thinks he still can do it. He thinks he's made a grand escape, even though others facilitated it, to move into spirit. He's now trying to use his force of will to have an effect on the upcoming court cases, either through telepathing with lawyers, or trying to, or just trying to impose his will. And he'll find out how difficult that is. I think he's already found out. But he'll continue on that path for a while until he realizes the futility of it. And again, I would point out the idealists in this world will push their goals until they realize the futility of their goals. And that usually manifests, in middle-aged despair. Faith almost always turns into despair. Whether the faithful actually will admit it is another story. In my experience, that's what happens. And whereas knowledge never turns into ignorance. Once you're on not even a pinnacle of knowledge, once you're on a plateau of knowledge from which other pinnacles can be seen, that plateau is never lost to you. It's not a castle made of sand. And while I love and respect those who pursue the path of faith, I would advise them to infuse that path with knowledge. Faith is not enough. Knowledge is the way. And Jeffrey is gaining his knowledge as you are gaining yours. And Jeffrey will find forgiveness in himself, self-forgiveness. But he'll find it more easily, more quickly, if you give him some forgiveness too. He is not beyond redemption. And I'm sure I could talk for another hour, but I'm not going to. So enjoy your journey and forgive yourself. WordofGord here.